had been our regimental commander, had been promoted to one-star assistant division commander, so we had a new colonel. So anyhow, he came up to the top of the hill and he said, he asked me who was in charge, and I said I was, and he said, what's going on? And I said, well, there's some German tanks over there. And he said, let me have your glasses. Now, why he didn't have a pair of field glasses, I don't have the slightest idea. But he sort of took my glasses, and he got his head just above the oats or the wheat. And he looked over there, and for a few minutes he did not say a word. And then, if you ladies will excuse me, he said, well, I'll be goddamn, they are German, aren't they? And I really believed that he may have been operating in some areas behind us, but I don't believe that up until that day he had ever seen a live enemy with a weapon still in his hand. I got an idea that before the war was over, he got a little more acquainted with it, but at that point in time, he was a brand new regimental commander, and that was apparently his baptism in terms of seeing a German that still had a weapon and would still represent a threat. Well, he went on down the hill. Now, I'm going to tell you a few things that happened that day. He, about, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 minutes later, the tanks started moving out. And I don't know if the German commander had 25 tanks that day that he had at his to use, or whether he had 5 tanks in, and 2 hours later he got 5 more tanks, and 2 hours later he got 5 more tanks. Because every time they hit us, and the first attack came about 7:30, they used about 5 tanks. They were, for the most part, Panthers, Mark 5s with 75, Mark 6s, the Tigers, and for the first time I had seen the Tiger Royal. That was a 67-ton tank, and the biggest critter I ever laid eyes on. It'd scare you to death just to look at it in terms of size and everything. Well, we had intended, we were doing it. We had watched the tanks come all the way down into this little valley-like when they were starting up the hill. And I guess when they were about 30, oh, not more than 30 yards behind us, we started shagging down the hill. And earlier that morning, nature had called. And at that time I was wearing ODs, and on top of the ODs I had a pair of fatigues. And apparently I had not properly buttoned the fatigues. And in all honesty, they started coming down. I'm running down the hill with an M1 in one hand, a pair of field glasses in another hand, and my damn pants had fallen down. And I'm listening to German tanks coming up the hill right behind me. I sat down in the mud and took those fatigues off. Why I didn't pull them up, I don't know, but I could just see myself, you know, trying to run like this. So I sat down in the mud, took those fatigues off, left them there, and dropped the rest of the way down the hill. Well, to make a long story short, they hit us about 3 or 4 times during the day, and each time they would commit about, as I said, 4 or 5 tanks. We would destroy 2 or 3 or 4, and then they would call the attack off. Regimental history says that before the day was over, we had 16 German tanks burning in front of us. But along about 5, I don't know, maybe 5:20, 5:25, I came down from the outpost. My platoon guy had finished digging a foxhole, and it had water in it. And he said, I'll bail out, I'll try to get rid of the rest of this water, you go look for a roof. And I don't know if any of you all were in Europe, but I'll tell you what we did for a roof. After we dug our foxholes, we then used to pull up fence posts. And we'd lay a fence post across the foxhole, and then we'd go find a door, or we'd go find a bedstead, or we'd go find anything in the world that we could lay on top of the fence post, and we'd throw dirt back on top of that, and we had a pillbox. And it was almost impregnable. You could literally take a hit and still survive if you had done a good enough job of building. So here I go back into this little community. It had about 6 houses in it, and it didn't take me long to find out that somebody beat me to every door, to every bedstead. So I finally gave up and decided I wouldn't find one, and I went up, started up the road then to where the crossroads was, and about the time I got to the crossroads, the first half track of the 823rd TDs had been working with us pulled up. I hadn't seen them in about a month. You know, if you knew how a regiment was organized in World War II, or a regiment itself, we had 1 tank battalion that supported the regiment. We had 1 tank destroyer battalion, tank destroyer unit that worked with us too. And we'd been with them off and on, because sometimes they were attached to another regiment or someplace, but I hadn't seen these guys in quite some time. So they had pulled their half track up, but had not taken the 76.6 on the back of it. That was a 3-inch, it was a tow TD. And we were sitting, this is right on the edge of the Ruhr Valley, just northeast of Aachen, Germany. And there were a lot of old aircraft gun positions was in that area. And we happened to be sitting in one, and it amounted to being logs about 8 or 10 feet high that formed an open view. And dirt had been piled up around them. Must have been very effective against bombs being dropped or anything. But anyhow, I was leaning there, I was sitting against the wall talking to these guys, and I heard a round hit in the doorway. And right then I knew that the tanks had decided to come back and visit us again. I don't ever remember saying goodbye, God bless you, so long, or anything else. In one movement, I stood up, grabbed my rifle, and headed for the door. When I got to the door, I turned, because I was heading for my platoon, which at that time was maybe 100 yards from me, dug in along this fence line. And I might have run, I don't know, I might have turned and run maybe 6 or 7 feet before I looked up. And when I looked up, there were about 5 tanks coming down the hill. And the closest tank to me was maybe a little bit more than a half a length of a football field away, about 50 yards away. And they had infantry with them, and artillery was coming in. And I watched the turret on that tank swing. I saw him swing toward me. I watched the muzzle come down just a little bit, and I saw the red flash when he fired. And I knew he was. There was no question in my mind who he was shooting at. And the round was a 75 off the Mark V, and the 75 on the Panther was the hottest artillery piece in World War II. It had a muzzle velocity of 3,450 feet per second, but the fuse on it was 1.5. When you're laying in the hospital, you can figure all these things out. So I know that the shell hit my leg, took it off right at just about blue top, blew me in the air. I didn't know it at the time, but I knew exactly which way I turned over to the right, came down on my hands and knees, heading in the other direction. My helmet was blown off my head. My rifle was about 6 feet away. I looked over one leg, over one shoulder. My left leg was gone. And I could feel my right leg sting. I didn't know how badly I was hit or anything. And the only thing I could think of at that instant, I don't know what other people think of when they got wounded badly, but the only thing that was on in my mind was get that rifle back in my hands. I had lived with a rifle for months, day in and day out. I turned and started to crawl to the rifle, and the tank fired again. The round came in over my head, and it hit about 6 feet in front of me and exploded. And I caught all the shrapnel, the backlash from the shrapnel that hit in the face and then in the chest and in the arms. And suddenly I couldn't see out of my right eye, it was full of blood. And I decided I really didn't need that rifle. So it passed through my mind, I really don't need that. And I turned and started to crawl back to this anti-aircraft gun position. A couple of guys came out, grabbed a hold of it, and pulled me back in. And I laid there on my back, took my own belt off, made a tourniquet, put it on my leg, but I really wasn't bleeding very badly. And I'm not going to lie to you all. I don't know if you've ever hit your finger or something on a sharp edge and for about 5 seconds it didn't hurt. The impact of that shell exploding underneath me had numbed every nerve in my body. I absolutely had no pain at all. I mean, I was rational. I knew exactly what was going on. If anything, I was scared to death. I was afraid that the company commander would decide again that he ought to pull out, and I'd get caught and get left there. So I was apprehensive about that. But I laid there, and I asked the 4th platoon, or platoon sergeant, to call my own platoon and ask for my medic to come. And he did, and he came across open ground to me, thank the Lord. But we'd only had him as a replacement for about 2 weeks. He had not tried to put anybody together that was really sort of cut up. The first thing he did is he put a shot of morphine in my leg, and it wouldn't have made any difference where he put the morphine, you know, if it was going to do any good at all. And I believe that kid used every bandage he had trying to stop the flow of blood, because I was hit, I guess, in 50 different places with shrapnel and everything. And then several things happened. He said I was bleeding from the mouth, and he said, I don't know if you're hit internally or not, but he said, how about turning over? And I wore a 45, and in addition to an M1, and I took the pistol belt, I dropped it on both sides, and I rolled over, because you can't roll over with a canteen and everything else on it. And he cut my clothes off the back, and he said, you're hit. He said, I can see where wounds penetrated. I can't do anything about them. And when I turned back over, and I regret this to this day, I didn't put that pistol belt back on. I don't know why, I just wasn't thinking about it. Still had a pair of German field glasses around my neck, had a German P-38 underneath my field jacket. And I was bound and determined I was going to get something as a souvenir. See, I'd already decided I was going to survive. No way was I going to cave in. And I tried to con the members of the 4th Platoon, I was in the weapons platoon section. I tried to get them to go out and look for my helmet. Hell, I wanted that helmet back, among other things. I was going to keep it too. They claimed they couldn't find it. I don't know how much time they spent looking for it because there was still artillery coming in. But anyhow, I lost that, lost my 45, laid on the ground. I know exactly when I was hit. I had a GI watch and I had a PX watch. And my PX watch stopped at 34 minutes and 17 seconds after 5 o'clock. So I know exactly what time I was hit. But I lay there from 5:30 until 9:30 before the artillery fire had knocked off enough for the medics to get in. I recall a Jeep coming up. I had not lost consciousness. Perfectly rational, I think. And anyway, when they brought a stretcher, they didn't even put it on the ground. I stood up on my right leg and sat down on the stretcher. And at that time, I could see bone literally from my hip all the way down to my ankle on my right leg. And they put me, you've seen pictures of the Jeep with the stretchers up on the sides. That was the highest I'd been off the ground in 5 months. It scared me to death. I didn't think we'd ever make battalion, you know. But somehow or other, I managed to get back to battalion. And I did not go, I got treated in battalion. They started giving me plasma. Then you all know, in World War II, you had to go through regiment. That was another field hospital. You had to go through division. One was called regimental collecting. The next was called division clearing. You had to go through these hospitals. Somewhere between regiment and division, I went unconscious. This was about midnight. And when I came back to, and I don't know when it was, it might have been 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, everything I had was gone. The field glasses were gone. The P-38 was gone. Every cotton-picking thing I had. The only thing, and I meant to bring it tonight, the only thing I had left were map cases that I had aerial photos in, and I've still got those at home. But that's the only thing I had salvaged, and all the rest of it was gone. I spent 17 months in Army hospitals. They did a super job of putting me back together. I was telling the young ladies today that I haven't got one iota of criticism of the medical treatment that I received in the United States Army. I haven't got any criticism of the medical treatment that I've had since I left the service. Well, I say that, and I'm not really telling the truth, because about 1973, 74, I was having some troubles with my stump, and I went out to the VA on Claremont Road, and I knew I was going to have that surgery, and I said, who's going to operate on me? And they said, we don't know, you just have to check in. And I said, there's no way I'm going to check in and just let anybody cut on me. So I went to civilian doctors, went through 11 more operations, they rebuilt my stump, what the doctor did. It cost my insurance company $18,000, cost me about $2,500, and when it was all over, how many of y'all from Georgia? You know, Max Cleveland was head of the Veterans Administration at the time, and I wrote Max a letter, and I said, I don't give a damn about the insurance money, but how about my $2,500, send it back. I never got the money, and I'm not complaining about it, so don't worry about that. But seriously, they did take care of me. But I got to tell you a story. I was back in an English hospital, got back to, I spent about a week in a hospital in Liège. I spent about 3 weeks in a hospital in Paris. And if you ladies will forgive me, I'll tell you all the story about the Paris hospital. There were 8 of us in this room, and I don't really know exactly what the grades were, but we were there. And this little nurse that was working, an American nurse, took a liking to the kid that slept down in the corner. And so one night she came in there, and let me tell you, she gave us APCs and phenobarbital and morphine and codeine. I mean, 7 of us. She put 7 of us to sleep. Absolutely asleep. Now, what went on for 2 hours, I don't have the slightest idea. But she did manage to take care of us.
She took care of him, too.
And anyhow, but before I left there, I had a full body cast on from here all the way down. And one of the nurses used to come in the morning and she'd say, I knew you were still here. She said, I could smell you when I came on the end of the hallway because gas gangrene had developed in my right leg. and they shipped me on to England before they got that straightened up and everything. But then I got into England. I was in the hospital up in